sweet friends, and welcome back to the Quilter's Candy Shop, where you will find sweet treats for the discerning quilter. There has definitely been a shift in the weather. Autumn is falling and winter is creeping up on us, so it's time to make a beautiful quilt to help keep our toes and our nose from being froze. Today we are making a wonderful pattern called 5-Star Flannel. This pattern is part of a series of patterns called Big Block Quilts by Carrie-Along-Quilts. And yes, we are making it out of flannel. Now, you don't have to use flannel. You can make it out of regular quilting cotton as well. But the reason it's so great for flannel is because of the size of the pieces. We are going to be using this absolutely gorgeous flannel collection by Maywood Studio called Lazy Afternoon, which sounds perfect for snuggling by a cozy fire with a cup of hot chocolate and waiting out a winter storm. You can find our 5-Star Flannel pattern and the Lazy Afternoon Flannel collection on our website at www.thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. Well, let's get started. I will put the yardage requirements in the description box below so you know what you need to gather to sew along with me. You only need 5 coordinating prints, and the cutting instructions are very simple. Here's what you need. From your feature print, cut 5 12.5-inch squares. You can use a 12.5-inch square ruler, but if you have one that's a little bit larger, like a 15 or a 16, is helpful. From your light background print, cut 6 13.25-inch squares, 4 6.5 by 12.5-inch rectangles, and 4 6.5-inch squares. From your dark coordinate and your light coordinate, cut 12 7-inch squares each, 12 darks and 12 lights. Lastly, from your coordinating border print, cut 6 6.5-inch strips width of fabric and set those aside for later. That's it. That's all the cutting we're going to do. Block construction details are equally simple. All we have to do is make a couple dozen flying geese. To do that, we are going to be using the 4 at a time flying geese technique, which is super simple, super accurate, and at this scale, super fun, because once you're done with your flying geese, your construction is done and you are on your way to laying out your blocks for assembly. Before we begin, let's clarify our terminology. This is a flying geese block. It is always twice the width as to the height. For example, this block is 12 by 6 finished size. This is the body of the goose, and these are the wings. Some people call this the flock, and this is the sky. And I'm sure there's a half a dozen different ways that we could call these parts, but we're going to use body and wings so we all know what we're talking about. To figure out the sizes you need to cut, you need to know the finished size of your flying goose unit you are trying to create. For this pattern, the raw edge or the cut size is 6.5 by 12.5. So the finished size is going to be 6 by 12. The way to calculate the size squares that are needed is to add 1.25 inch to the finished width and 7/8 of an inch to the finished height. Now that calculation makes exact size flying geese. But as I don't sew a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance, we are sewing and pressing on the bias, and most importantly, we're working with flannel. I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks to getting beautiful flying geese blocks every time. Tip number 1 is always sew with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. That means sewing just a few threads to the inside of your seam line to allow for the thickness of your fabric in your pressing. And since flannel is much thicker than regular quilting cotton, it is essential you use a good scant 1/4 inch seam. To create our 4 at a time flying geese, we need one 13 1/4 inch square, which is our finished 12 inches wide plus 1 1/4 inches to equal 13 1/4 inches. For the wings, we need 4 6 7/8 inch squares, which is 6 inches, our finished height, plus 7/8 of an inch equals 6 7/8 inch squares. And here's where tip number 2 comes in. I like to add 1 inch instead of 7/8 on my wings squares. This gives me a little room for error, and I can square up the flying geese block in the end. And that's why the directions call for a 7-inch square. Number 3, mark your diagonal lines across the wrong side of your 4 squares for your wings before placing them on the larger body square. I've seen a lot of people put their squares down and then use your ruler to mark the line. The problem is you won't always have them exactly lined up. If you mark your line on the back of your squares first and then lay them out on your body square, if these lines line up perfectly from your corner to each other and to your other corner, you're going to have beautiful corners in the end. Which brings me to tip number 4. You should pull your smaller squares in from the corner, leaving just a little extra space, not even a whole 1/8 of an inch. By pulling your wing pieces in a little closer to the center, you will have a good solid 1/4 inch allowance at the peak of your flying geese block. And that's really important. Now that you've got your wing blocks all lined up, pin them in place and sew scant 1/4 inch down both sides of the line. Then use a rotary cutter and a ruler and cut apart your 2 triangles on the marked diagonal line. Press open your wing triangles and you should have what looks like a heart block. Next, you're going to lay your wing piece across the block like this. You will have 2 of these heart blocks, so you're going to use the last 2 of your wing squares, lay it across like this, and stitch a scant 1/4 inch on both sides of the marked diagonal line. Once you have your seams sewn, take your rotary cutter and a ruler and cut right on that line, separating these 2 pieces. And that's what gives you your flying geese. Press this seam open to the side like this, and you have 2, and from the other triangle you will have 2 more, giving you 4 flying geese from 1 large square. If you have chosen to use any of these additional tips, you will need to trim your flying geese block to make it the right size. But that's what makes it perfect every time. I always start by straightening and trimming the top edge first because we want to ensure that that 1/4 inch is going to be perfect. Line this up so your 6 1/4 line goes right to the peak and your 6 1/2 line comes right down to the corner. Repeat the steps with your dark and your light wing squares until you have 12 dark and 12 light flying geese blocks. Once you have all of your flying geese made, you have all the elements you need to put this quilt together. And this quilt goes together in a slightly different way. We're going to start from the outsides and work in. The first thing we're going to do is make the top and bottom rows. They are exactly the same, and they use 4 of our light flying geese and put them together end to end like this. And that is going to be the bottom accent border. And you're going to take 4 more and you're going to make 2 of this row. Okay, now that you have your 2 accent border rows made, we're going to be making the 2 rows that attach to the accent border. For that, you need 2 of your dark flying geese, 2 of the small squares, 6.5-inch squares, those go on the end, and 1 of the 6x12 rectangles. Once you get these pieces sewn together, it sews to the accent border. Make another row exactly the same as the one you just finished, except flip it around so it will sew to the bottom accent border. So sew these 2 together and then sew them to your row, and we'll make the next set. And here are the top 2 rows and the bottom 2 rows. And as you can see, we're starting to get into the stars. Now you can set these aside, but I like to use them as a guide. So I'm going to slide this one all the way up here, because the next row we're going to make is the double star centers. So that's going to take 2 of your focus fabric blocks like this, and 3 of your dark flying geese. You go vertical on the outside flying geese, and then this one goes horizontal like that. And then that means you need 1 of these. Oops, almost had that backwards. So double check your flying geese all the time. It's easy to get them pointing the wrong direction. Okay, so 1 like this, and your light like that. So this is the next row, and once you get this together, it is going to sew onto that. You're going to make one exactly like this, except turn it around and sew it on right here. When you make the one for here, it's just these 2 are going to be different. This one's going to be at the bottom, and this one's going to be at the top, and it will sew to your bottom pair of rows. Okay, here I have my next row sewn onto my upper section, and everything's working out beautifully. I'm just going to slide that all the way up there. And here is the bottom section. And you can see they are exactly the same except flipped. So I'm going to pull this down. All that's left is to fill in this row here. So I'm going to set my bottom section aside and bring over what's left of my pieces. Everything you have left from your cut pieces should fit in this row. I like to save this row for last because it's a bit of a puzzle and things don't look right until you get done. So start by putting the center focus print right in the center. You can't go wrong with that one. Then put in the light flying geese that creates the star. Now, if you get that right, the rest goes together pretty easily. What you have left are dark flying geese and spacer backgrounds. The spacer backgrounds go all the way to the outside, like that. And the dark flying geese go vertically next to the spacer block, like this. You're going to create a background square on point by putting these 2 flying geese together. Sew those together Sew this row to the top row, and then sew the bottom section onto here, and all that's left is our border. And here it is, the whole inside of the quilt. The bottom 2 stars, the center star, and of course the top star with the accent border. All that's left is to put on the outer borders. For your outer borders, you're going to take 2 strips with the fabric and sew them end to end, and another 2 strips and sew them end to end. Press those seams open, and these are going to go on the side of your quilt. So you will need to measure the top of your quilt to the bottom of your quilt, and then cut these border pieces to fit precisely. Do not try to sew these on and then cut them off. Because you're working with flannel, it stretches so easily, you will be very disappointed in the outcome. So cut the pieces exactly the same size and put them on to fit. The pieces that are left over from your side borders can get attached to the last 2 pieces, and do the same thing for the top and bottom. Once you have your borders on, your top is complete. I'm going to do mine, and let's see how it looks. And here is my finished top with the really pretty border. I think this turned out really great. For the backing, I'm going to be using this coordinating print that matches the border but in the light version. I think that's going to be the perfect backing. And I have plain black flannel for the binding, which will set everything off very nicely. If you would like to try our 5-star flannel pattern, you can find the Lazy Afternoon flannel kit, including the pattern, in our shop at www.thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. And you'll have everything you need, including the binding and the pattern, to make your beautiful 5-star flannel quilt. I just love the way this turned out. I think the flannel is beautiful. The big blocks make it super simple, and this can be used for any time of year. Thanks for joining us for our 5-star flannel sew-along today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share with a friend. And for watching all the way to the end of the video, you can use the code FLANNEL to get 5% off of your 5-star flannel kit. Just enter the code at checkout. Now, it's time for you to go sew something sweet. Bye!